Hello, and welcome to another Rant Rave review. Today we will be ranting about The Handmaid's Tale. Not the show, I don't care about it, I shall never watch it. The book. The book of A Handmaid's Tale. Oh, oh. I read it for a book club. I would not have read it otherwise. I really had no desire to read it. But I read it for a book club. People voted on it. People came to the book club. And one of the ladies said it's a masterpiece. And I had to hold my tongue so hard. I was just like, okay. What's the problem with The Handmaid's Tale? Oh, we're going to go through the entire plot and talk about it. So this is a full-on spoiler review. You've either read it and know the whole plot or you don't care. So YOLO spoilers. But the two main problems to start off with. Number one, it is not feminist. At least I would not describe it as feminist literature. A good example. Oh, it's trying to be. It's trying to be good feminist literature, but it fails hard. And two, the world building. Oh no. The way their society is run, and I'll talk about the whole backstory and why Gilead came to be and whatnot. The way it is run doesn't make a lick of sense. And it's really funny because I guess in the foreword of the book, Margaret Atwood is like, everything in this book happened somewhere in the world. It's all realistic. And I'm like, yeah, maybe individually, but like not together the way you'd make it. Like you would never do these things the way you do them. Which is also funny, back to the feminist thing. And we'll bring this back, don't you worry. One of the main characters, a dude, is talking about how, like, women, like, I forget exactly what he says. Basically, he's like, for women, like, 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4. It's just, like, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4. And I don't know, and like, eventually Offred, the main character, is like, I understood what he meant. And I was like, I still don't understand what he mean. I'm assuming it means that, like, women can't do math? I don't know. But, like, it feels like Margaret Atwood thinks that way, where she's like, oh, yeah, if you have, like, this thing that happened in, like, communist China, and this thing that happened in Iran, and this thing that happened, and this thing that happened, it all makes sense. It's all real because it happened. And it's like, okay, but does any of that, like, stick together? Because it all has to actually fit together to make sense. But we'll get to that. That's my new byline. We'll get to that. Okay, so, Gilead. Gilead is basically... Okay. Okay. So, Gilead is the modern day, at least the Northeast America. It's unclear. It's one of those dystopian novels where it's unclear exactly how far-reaching the, like, country is. But Gilead is essentially the country. It's definitely, like, the northeastern United States, kind of trying to take over all of the United States. There's, like, a civil war going on. And we know that what happened was basically... Gilead, this, like, religion, I must call them a cult, because that's what they are, and we'll talk about that. They essentially, like, assassinated the president and used this to take over. They took over America, and now they run at least the northeast coast, and they're fighting a civil war to take over the rest of the coast. This book was not written in the 1980s, by the way. And it's suggested that either much of the country, if not the world, has been affected by nuclear fallout from, like, a war or nuclear waste from, like, nuclear plants going toxic. It's unclear, but much of the world, which Gilead calls the colonies, are basically, like, swamped under, like, toxic waste, basically. And that's, like, the setting. Okay. If you're thinking, like, gee, that kind of reminds me of The Hunger Games or Divergent or other YA dystopias, oh, just wait. So, Gilead is a theocracy, and Offred, our main character, is a handmaid. And so, let's talk about the Society of Gilead. So... do I want the Society of Gilead or the plot? The Society. Because the Society is where it all really falls apart. But let's just start with the Society. Men and women. Very strict, very differentiated roles. Men are essentially the commanders, who are the head honchos of the Gilead cult. There are eyes, who are the secret police, who I honestly wish the book was about because they sound much more interesting. Angels, who are like young men, who are like soldiers or police. fighting in the Civil War against the rest of the country or policing Gilead. I think that the specific place this book takes place in is like Boston. I think Boston or Harvard area is where it's taking place. Okay, that's men. Oh, and plus, like, apparently, question mark, every other dude who, like, doesn't have a special name, question mark. I don't know. Someone has to run the butcher shop. Someone makes clothes. Someone, like, but they don't have a weird, like, dystopian YA novel name because, anyway. And yes, I will continue to compare this to a YA dystopian novel because it is not quite as good as one, honestly, truly. But we'll get to that. Women in the Gilead Society. Okay. You have wives. Oh, before I get to the women, I should mention a huge part of this novel. All the toxic waste and whatnot, even before Gilead came to power, has caused fertility problems. Either a bunch of people are completely infertile, or their babies are born, like, stillborn or with birth defects, etc., 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 okay? Huge problem, okay? Offred remembers in the before times. They don't actually call it the before times, but they might as well. In the before times, some woman once tried to, like, kidnap her daughter because, of the whole, like, empty nest thing. Not empty nest. It's not called that, but, like, it actually is a real syndrome where, like, certain women, like, if their baby is born, if they have a miscarriage, they go a little, like, crazy and, like, will actually literally, like, try to steal other people's kids. Like, it's rare, but it does happen. Anyway, I was gonna say, I think it happens with lions too, but I don't know if that's true or if I'm completely making that up. But anyway, it's irrelevant. So, fertility is a huge problem, okay? This is important for literally everything else that happens in the novel. Remember this. Okay, so women. You can be a wife who wears blue, because this is a YA dystopia. You can be a handmaid who wears red, a Martha who wears green, an aunt who wears brown, or an econo wife, which we'll get to. Okay. So, wives wear blue, they're married to commanders. They are very fancy. Like, again, if commanders are the head honchos of Gilead cult, wives are also head honchos of Gilead cult. They get married. Some wives are fertile. Some wives aren't. And it's super taboo to ever call a commander sterile or infertile. So if you're an infertile or sterile wife, or if your husband is infertile or sterile, either way, if you can't have babies, you are given a handmaid who wears red, and she basically gets impregnated by the commander and has the kid for you. Okay? We'll get into the discussion of the specifics of the handmaids once we talk about Offred. Marthas wear green and are the servant class. It's never really made clear if they're like older women or infertile women, because in some places it says infertile women are called unwomen and sent to the colonies, but there's no reason that a Martha would have to be fertile, so I'm assuming the subtext is like they're infertile but they're like loyal to the regime? Question mark? I don't know. None of our business, apparently. But they're the servant class. And then there's the aunts who run the re-education centers that re-educate handmaids. Now you might ask, why do handmaids need re-educating? Aside from, like, no one wants to be a weird sex slave. Well, it's because handmaids are actually, they're not just any fertile women. Now, that's what I thought. Before I read this book, I assumed that, like, oh, women are infertile, and if you're fertile, you're, like, made into a handmaid, and the weird Gilead cult, for some reason, thinks that, like, wives shouldn't be fertile or something. I don't know. No. That would make far too much sense. Wives sometimes are fertile, in which case they don't need a handmaid. But if they're infertile, they get a handmaid. And handmaids were fertile women. They have to be fertile women. But they were, like, political dissidents or otherwise, like, enemies of Gilead. So, let's rewind a little bit to the enemies of Gilead. So we learned that Offred, she is a handmaid. Why is she a handmaid? Well, because before Gilead rose to power, she, like, had an affair with a married man named Luke. He eventually split from his wife and married her, and they had a kid. And you're not supposed to get divorced, and therefore She's an enemy of the state. Pause. We're like rewinding. Strike one is some people like, well, it's not strike one, it's like strike three by now, but don't worry, we'll get to that. My question is for Margaret Atwood, because Margaret Atwood said, well, Gilead, they aren't really Christian, as if like I'm not writing an anti-Christian book. But I'm like, okay, but like, then why couch it in Christian terms? And also, why have an otherwise like fundamentalist cult, but make them care about something that only Catholics... I don't know a single other Christian sect that cares about divorce. Like, I don't know a single other sect that is like, oh, you can't divorce. Catholics are like, yeah, don't get divorced. Or if you do, don't get remarried. I don't know literally any... So I'm like, so right there, I'm like, are you against Catholics? Or what are you talking... Okay, weird. Whatever. It's also funny because like, they're like, oh, well, it's like about the Bible. And like, because the whole like Handmaid thing is Leah... I forget who they are. Jacob's wives. Long story short, Jacob's wives were sisters, and they had, like, beef with each other, because you should probably not marry sisters, like, honestly. And one of them was infertile briefly, and was like, oh, we'll just have my handmaid, and have, like, a baby through her. And he was like, I mean, okay. Because Jacob was just the worst. No. Yes. No, read the Bible. You're like, Abraham, kind of he's okay, but his wife is awful. Isaac, perfect child. Jacob, piece of work. Read the Bible, people. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, he impregnated like one of their handmaids, and then the other one was like, I have kids, but I'm jealous, ? I don't know, have kids through my handmaid. And he's like, I mean, okay, but... And so yeah, it was just a mess. And we learned, yeah, it's just a mess. And so you have the whole like, oh, well, Gilead is doing these things with the Bible, and they all care about the Bible, and they're a cult. And I'm like, okay, but the Bible allows divorce? At least in Judaical times, like before Christianity, they did. Like, Jesus said you can't, but you did before, and the whole, like, having sex with your handmaid to have kids was before, so, like, which one is it? Which one is it? What, Gilead, what are you doing? What are you doing, Gilead? What are you doing, Margaret Atwood? Well, we'll get to that, okay. Okay, back to the, okay. Offred is... Sorry, this is a rant. Anyway, I could edit it, but I think that my editing software has expired. All right. Offred was divorced. Offred tried to escape to Canada with her husband and her child. They got caught. Oh, noes. And now she was sent to a re-education center for handmaids. And we learned, one of her friends is also sent there. Moira, the only good character in the entire book. Moira was a lesbian, which is also, like, horrible, like, in Gilead. So... she was sent there to be re-educated, and Moira is a total boss because she tries to escape. She gets captured and sent to we'll talk about that. Someplace. She gets sent someplace, but at least she tried to escape, okay? But basically, handmaids there was something wrong with them, political dissidents, enemies of Gilead. They're sent to the Handmaid Re-Education Center. Well, they have a choice, quote unquote. For example, nuns are also enemies of Gilead because they're fertile, but they're like, you're not supposed to have sex with us. So basically, like, you can go, if you are fertile and you're a political dissident or an enemy of Gilead, you can be sent to the colonies and basically, like, die of toxic waste syndrome because you're cleaning toxic waste, even though, hello, not really. Or you can become a handmaid if you're a girl. If you're a guy, you get killed right away and hung on the wall. Nice. So, political dissidents. We also learn that the children of people like Offred, like the daughter, who was 5 when all of this was taken over, we learn, right? We're very, very, very soon we learn that the daughter was 5 years old. The daughters of these political dissidents are taken and then given to commanders and wives. A similar thing actually did happen with, like, children of, like, enemies of Germany during Nazi Germany. They're just like, yoink, we'll just take your kid and give them to, like, a Nazi family to, like, brainwash and indoctrinate. But wait, there's another problem. Another problem is this, okay? This is the first world-building problem. If adoption is a thing, which it clearly is if you can just yoink the daughters and sons of political dissidents and give them to wives, why do you need handmaids? Shouldn't you just take the children that are born to like literally any fertile woman and just give them to a wife? Why the whole weird handmaid ceremony, which is basically where like the dude impregnates the handmaid while the like wife is there? It's really weird and kinky and bizarre. And I think Atwood has some problems. I'm saying that officially. I think she has some weird kinky problems, and the people who dress in weird like handmaid cosplay whenever abortion is talked about also have some weird kink problems, but we'll get to that later. The point being, there's no reason for this like handmaid ceremony weirdness when you could, I'm gonna put on my evil dictator hat, okay? I'm an evil dictator in a horrible patriarchy. Yes. There's a fertility crisis. I'm only going to let wives be fertile women, and if you're infertile, you're automatically a Martha servant class. That's one way of doing it. One way of doing it is you can only get married if you're fertile, and if you're infertile, you can't get married and you're just a servant. The other way of doing it is if you are going to allow adoption, which you should since you already do, you should just keep all the like fertile political dissidents in like a sex slavery factory. Like, and I know that sounds horrible, but that's what you would do. You wouldn't have your weird friggin' like, I don't even know what. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm like, no, you'd still have weird sex slavery. You would just have it extremely controlled. You wouldn't worry about brainwashing these women because who cares if they're into it or not. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know this sounds really awful, but like that's what you would do if you were evil. But Atwood's like, I don't know why I didn't write that. Who knows? 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. Which is a thing in the book about women not understanding math. Anyway, which we'll get to that. Anyway, so it doesn't make sense. What else doesn't make sense is that handmaid. So after you get re-educated, you're sent to a commander, and wives don't have sex with their husbands. Well, some of them do. That's what's really weird. Some wives have sex with their commanders, and some wives just like, I don't know, knit or something. Marthas do the cooking and the cleaning, but not the shopping. No. Me, the oppressive Gilead regime, I'm going to have all the handmaids who are like political dissidents go shopping out and about, and they're going to be paired up with each other. And in the book, it's like, to keep an eye on each other. And I'm like, BS. No. Like, I don't care how brainwashed you are. That is how you get rebellions. And what a shock. Friggin' Offred and Of-Glen. And their names are Of Fred, because Fred's the commander, and Of Glen, because Glen's her commander. Very clever. Oh, they lost their name. I'm supposed to care for some reason. Anyway, yeah, they're sent shopping together. So they can collaborate and plot and scheme and like join the resistance. You wouldn't do that. That is my main problem with this book, is it makes no sense. The world building makes no sense. Margaret Atwood thinks herself very, very clever because she like picked and chose individual cases from history and dumped them into a pot and didn't care if it made any sense. And all these women are like, oh my gosh, this is like a feminist novel, so I'm just going to turn my brain off and think it's amazing. And I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense. And I compare it to a YA dystopian novel because it's the same thing with like Pan Am, where you're like, oh yeah, you know what? Let's make all of the people who we're ruling over hate each other, or like hate us for like killing their kids. Like, I don't like, and we're gonna, nothing makes sense. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. But it makes less and less sense because, okay, remember how I talked about wives, Marthas, and handmaids? Okay. Then we have people, and I talked about how like there's the commanders and the angels and the eyes. Well, there's also women called econo wives, because that's how you name things in a dystopia. And econo wives, which sounds very shameful and low class, because it is. Econo wives wear, it's the dumbest thing, they wear red, green, and blue because they take on the roles of handmaids, bearing children, green, cleaning and cooking, and blue, like being a wife. And I'm like, isn't that just like being a normal woman? And you, the thinking person, say, why, yes, it is. So, now to be fair to Atwood, there have been many societies where the rich and elite are totally wackadoo and the, like, lower class actually are rather, like, ordinary in terms of, like, marriage and relationships. Like, yeah. But what doesn't make sense to me is I'm like, how can you possibly live in a society like this where fertility is basically your god, and you allow any schmo who runs the butcher shop to marry a fertile chick and the commanders may or may not get to? Unless handmaids are always covering for, like, an infertile commander, which is suggested that, like, Offred's commander is infertile, but, like, or sterile or whatever, same thing. But it's not, like, made clear. Like, clearly some handmaids are impregnated by their commanders. Therefore, I'm like, again, doesn't make sense. If I were running this society, I'm an evil patriarch, okay? If you want to be a wife, you have to be fertile, first of all, okay? And commanders get their pick of fertile women. Econo wives, like, it's a 50-50 gamble if she's fertile or not. Like, or you wouldn't have one. Like, it's also kind of suggested, and it's unclear if, like, you have to have sex when you're fertile, because, like, handmaids do. Handmaids, the ceremony is when they're fertile. But, like, it's kind of implied that, like, you have to be fertile to have sex, question mark. I don't know. I honestly think I'm putting in 5,000 times more thought than Atwood ever did. Like, honestly, truly. But again, I'm like, you would never have an infertile wife and a fertile econo wife. It doesn't make sense. It would be such a blot on your, like, character to be infertile, and it's so weird. Okay. So that's, like, the main... Oh, no, I'm sorry, there's one more class of women. Before we get to Offred's story, there's one more world-building thing that just makes me want to rip my head off and throw it at the wall. And that is Jezebels. Yes, Jezebels is, like, the secret brothel that commanders get to go to. Because, of course, you can't just have a cult where people are true believers. You have to have them all be hypocrites. So they go to Jezebels, and Jezebels is a brothel where... What? A bunch of, like, political dissident women are also put as, like, punishment, question mark? I don't know. It's so funny because Gilead is very, like, apparently, like, they're, like, super evil, but they're also like, I mean, you can go to the waste dumps, you can go be a handmaid, you can go to the brothel. I mean, it's not a great choice, but it's weird that they'd give you any. Anyway, so, Moira, remember the only character worth literally anything? She, after escaping, got captured and sent to Jezebel's. So now she's a prostitute. And it's really sad and depressing, even though she's still the best character. Because she has, like, spunk and, like, agency. We'll get to that. So, we learn, remember, fertility crisis. We learn that if you are a political dissident or whoever, before you're sent to Jezebel's, you get sterilized. Yeah, that makes sense. Doesn't it? Doesn't it make sense? Oh, doesn't it also make sense to, like, ship fertile nuns off to the colonies? No, it doesn't. None of this makes sense. Again, okay. I'm the dictator. You're a fertile nun? You don't get a choice. You have to have babies. You're a fertile lesbian? You don't get a choice. You have to have babies. You're a fertile literally anyone? You don't get a choice. You have to have babies. If you're infertile, we can ship you to the colonies, or you can go to Jezebel's. That's your choice. You would never sterilize women in a fertility crisis like this, okay? Because it's kind of implied that the reason that Gilead was even able to come to power was because of the fertility crisis. Like, there's no way that, because, like, it's also made clear that, like, in the Civil War, like, Quakers and Jews and Catholics are fighting against Gilead. They're not in favor of this. And I'm like, how many Gileadians in that cult do there have to be numbers-wise to go against all other religions. Like Presbyterians, I think, are even freaking fighting against them. And I'm like, so you're telling me that there's so many people in this cult that they would be able to stand a chance against every other religion going against them? That must be a big cult, and it must be because of the fertility crisis, right? Question mark, isn't it? It kind of seems like it is. And if all of this is true, if fertility is God, then you would never sterilize anybody. Anybody. Ever. So maybe you have fertile women in the Jezebel's prostitute thing, okay? And what if they have a baby? You know what you do? You take the baby and you give it to a wife who's infertile, just like you gave the daughters of any political dissident, because we've already established that adoption is a thing. It's in the world building already. It makes no sense. Oh my gosh. Okay. And here's what freaking bothers me about this, okay? End of rant about world building. But before we move on to Offred's story, I had so many people, one person called this a masterpiece. A masterpiece. And I'm like, really? What do you think a masterpiece is? Like, it's so full of holes, it's like Swiss cheese. What I'm hearing is that women are too stupid to expect a well-written book, and we should just turn off our brains. And as long as you make us feel like terror, oh my gosh, what if that happened to me? Then apparently it's like a well-written book and it's a masterpiece and it's feminist literature. It is not feminist literature, which we'll get to with Offred's story, but it just makes me super angry that I'm expected to like this and identify with it because I'm a woman. No, because I like well-written books, and I like books that can actually hold up under their own weight. This is ridiculous and so poorly written, it makes my blood boil. Okay, so that brings us to Offred, our main character, who suffers from the same fatal flaw as the main character in 1984. Namely, I do not care if they live or die. The authors forgot to, make me like them. Oopsie doodle. I've talked before on this channel about the pet the dog moment. This is where you have your main character. If you want us to like them, you have them pet the dog, which can be a literal petting a dog. It can be picking up, mail for their neighbor who dropped it. It can be just, saying hi to somebody who, something nice and pleasant to make us just be like, I like that guy. Yeah. 1984, didn't happen. Handmaid's Tale, didn't happen. In fact, Handmaid's Tale does the opposite. A kick the dog moment. Actually, 1984 does too. Yikes. Ooh, the main character is so creepy in the, very weird sexual stuff that he wants to do. Kick the dog moment, okay? Kick the dog moment is when you have the bad person who you want us to dislike do something mean, like kicking a dog. Offred is similar to that, where there are these angels. Remember, these are young men. They have like pimply faces, so they're probably like 15 or 16. And she's like noticing them watching her. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, they can't, like, touch women, like, well, I hope they, like, she basically says, like, she hopes that they lust after her and, like, have to, like, go pleasure themselves because they can't touch a woman. And I'm just like, wow, I don't use expletives, but you're a terrible person. You're just the worst. Just, what a scumbag. Like, these are kids who didn't choose this. And then she's like, oh, I shouldn't feel, and she kind of, like, feels bad about it. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I would never think that about my worst enemy, okay? I'm sorry. Like, what a trash human. And then we learn, again, I talked about why she's a handmaid, we learn that she was having an affair with a dude who's married. And I'm like, again, kick the dog moment. I hate adultery. And Luke, her husband, is similarly awful. I think he dies, and I'm like, what are you gonna do? You're an oath breaker. You made an oath to love this person for, like, the rest of your life, and you broke that oath. And then Offred helped him do it. I'm just like, it's an uphill battle getting me to care about these people. You could do it. I have read some things with, like, horrible characters, like actual villains, where I'm like, I hope they burn. I hope they die. And then by the end of it, I'm like, I would die for them. So you can do it. You can actually, like, walk these things back. But the problem is, I think, and apparently everyone who loves this book does this, where because, like, Offred is a woman, I, as a woman, am just supposed to, like, identify with her. In fact, that's the problem with, like, a ton of modern, like, quote, strong, unquote, female characters, is they just, like, make them, like, awful people, but, like, ladies, and they're like, see, don't you identify with this? And I'm like, No? Do you think that, like me, I automatically identify with literally 50% of the population that I happen to be the same sex as? No? No, you have to either... And my thing is, like, again, not even identify. Just care about. Just care about. Again, I don't really identify with characters. I care about characters, even if they're not like me. But I'm like, you have to give me a reason to like them. You have to give me a reason to like them. Moira, I like Moira because she is trying to fight back against the system. Like, she's spunky. She has, like, a personality. And she's basically like, like... She's very angry at people and crude, but, like, not in a mean-spirited way, just in a, like, she's just kind of like, yeah, like, this is awful. I don't know. I don't know. She just bothers me. She just bothers me. Not Moira. Moira, you were too good for this book. Honestly, if there was a book about Moira, but the same setting, I wouldn't be as forgiving about the setting, because the setting is awful, but I might not have hated it. But Offred, unfortunately, is our viewpoint character. First person present tense viewpoint character, too. Oh boy. Oh boy. So, anyway, this is our introduction to the character, okay? And everybody uses these weird slangy, like, cults. The reason I say it's a cult instead of a religion is they have these weird turns of phrase where, like, when the handmaids go out together, they're like, oh, praise be. And they're like, oh, praise be. And they all have these weird, like, very stilted, like, faux biblical things, and women aren't allowed to read anything, so instead of having, like, signs on the shops, they just have, like, a meat picture and, like, a bread picture and all this stuff. And it's all very weird, okay? And like, the before time, they don't say the before times, but they might as well, because it's all very stilted and very weird. There's even a part later on, well, I'll talk about it in a sec, because the whole time I was like, how old is Offred? We know that her daughter was 5 when they tried to escape to Canada. So, we know she's also pre-menopausal because, hello, she's fertile, she's a handmaid. So I'm like, okay, that's like a wide range. Like, how many decades has this Gilead thing been going on? And then, Offred says, how old would my daughter be? 8? And I was like, spit take, are you kidding me? It's 3 years. 3 years! It's been 3 years, and everybody is talking all cultically, and apparently these 15-year-old boys have never seen a woman, and I'm like, this is the 1980s. They would have been 12. Like, granted, like, porn wasn't as pernicious and everywhere as it is today, but I'm pretty sure that they've seen, like, girls not in handmaid gear. They'd probably seen girls in their classes they had crushes on. Like, 3 years. 3 years, okay? There's even a part later on at Jezebel's where, like, Moira's dressed up as, like, a Playboy bunny, and Offred's like, bunny ears, like, what was that? What was that? And I'm like, it's the most recognizable, like, sexy lady outfit, Playboy bunny. Like, give me a break. Like, and this isn't, like, a world-building thing. It kind of is, because nothing would be this forgotten in 3 years. This is a, like, writing thing of, like, why didn't you set it 20 years in the future? Like, you could do that. Like, let's say that Offred was 25 when she had her daughter. 20 years in the future, she would be 45. You can still have kids when you're 45. Like, maybe this is the end. She's like, oh man, soon I'm gonna be, like, ditched for the colonies if I don't have a baby. Yeah, makes no sense, okay? No one would be this much like the before times if it had only been 3 years. Especially teenagers, like, it makes no sense, okay? But the worst thing, the thing where I was like, because before I was like, I'll give it a break. But the thing with the daughter being 8, I was like, I'm done. You are out of chances. Because we learn, handmaids have 3 assignments before they have 3 chances, essentially, to have a kid. Assignments with a commander. And if you don't have a kid by your 3rd commander, you get sent off to the colonies. If you do have a kid by your 3rd commander, you can't get sent to the colonies, I guess. You get, I don't know, you probably become a Martha? Question mark? I don't know. Or euthanized? That would make... I would just euthanize them. But anyway, okay, actually, no, I wouldn't. Because we learn, how long are these assignments? 10 years? No, these are 2-year assignments. 2-year assignments. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. During a fertility crisis, you take women who you know are fertile. That's why they're handmaids. You give them 6 years to have a baby, and if they don't, you send them to the colonies. Incorrect! You just keep trying until they have a baby. They're fertile. They had a kid once. The kid was healthy in the before times. You just keep trying until she has a kid. It's a fertility crisis. Like, it makes no sense, okay? But the worst thing, I hate this book, and this is going to seem like the dumbest reason for somebody to hate a book, but I hated this book. We know it's Offred's third assignment. She says it's her third. 2 years? 2 years. She's on her third assignment. Her daughter was 5. How old is her daughter now? I guess that women like Offred and Atwood can't do math, I guess. Because she would be 9. She would be 9. Unless, someone correct me. Did Offred get, an early assignment that her commander die? It made me so angry. And nobody talks about this. I was like, 4 plus 5 is 9? Not 8? And it's really funny because there's this part in the book where the commander is like, women don't think of 2 plus 4 as being 2 plus 2. They just think of 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. And, I don't know if it's a commentary on who knows what, but I guess it's women can't do math, lol, which I guess is proved by, the author, lol. It made me so angry because it was nobody, either, it was an accident and Atwood just didn't bother to check and no editor bothered to check, which makes me very angry. Or it was on purpose and, women just can't do math, lol. How is this a feminist book? And why am I expected to like it and lap it up? Because I'm a woman? No. So stupid. So anyway. Blah, blah, blah. Weird kinky sex, ceremony, blah, blah, blah. Many adventures. I don't care. It's really boring. It's funny, too, because I already knew this reading it, which made me actually think about it more. At the end of the book, which I'll just say that at the end of the book we learn there's an epilogue where it's the historical conference studying the period of Gilead, hundreds of years ago, and they found this is the Handmaid's Tale. It's these tapes that we found after Offred escaped, and they're debating. It's honestly the best part of the book because it's punchy and funny and interesting, and people are debating whether or not these tapes are real, and they're trying to figure out who her commander was based on all these historical clues. It's so much better than the rest of the book. But the problem with it is we're meant to think that the entire rest of the book was what she recorded onto tape. And I'm no, because you would not tell a story this way. You might tell a friend over tea, and then I said, or then I say, and I do this. You might do present tense, but if you're recording something for a tape, telling a story, you wouldn't do present tense. And also, there's so many things where, it's obviously she's talking in the present tense of, what she's doing that night, that you wouldn't have it like that if it was on tape. It's just, read it again and just feel, if you read it before, don't read it again if you've never read it. Ugh. But, she's reading it and, it just doesn't sound like you would sound if you were talking into a tape recorder. It just bothered me. Somebody clip that and just use it as a reaction gif. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, okay, so Offred, blah, blah. Oh, did I talk about babies? Okay. So, I don't know his name. Some other handmaid gets pregnant and everyone's very happy. Yay. Oh, and they have this, birthing ceremony where, the wife sits behind the handmaid and the handmaid gives birth and it's funny because they have it on a birthing stool, and I'm assuming this is meant to be backward or something, and I'm actually lying down to give birth is kind of not the best way to do it, and like most cultures actually do it like kind of like crouching because it's easier on the body, but I don't know. Us women, oh, silly. Anyway, so birthing ceremony. So this wife has, oh no, the handmaid gives birth, and then immediately the baby is given to like the wife, and it's like her baby now, and it's very sad. Yes, obviously that would be sad. I feel sorry for this handmaid because I mean, like, I don't know, she's probably a nice person, and she probably didn't become a handmaid for kicking dogs. I mean, maybe she did, but anyway, and we hear that like there's babies who are keepers, and there's unbabies who are shredders. And that I actually like as a dystopian trope. I'm all about the like eugenics and like human experimentation, so in books, not in real life. So I was like, wow, that's incredibly creepy. And it's and we learn again like it's because of like birth defects, because of all the chemicals, so like that's a shredder, an unbaby. And I do like, this is the kind of like dystopian language which is much more accurate to real life, of like unbabies and keepers, and like an unwoman or an unbaby. Like, they're not a person, so you don't have to care about them. You can just like send them to the colonies or shred them, and you're like, big yikes. Because hello, that's literally like how all genocides happen, is you like unperson somebody, and you're like, well, they're not a real X, Y, or Z, fill in the blank. We can just get rid of them. That is how genocides happen. Fun fact. Fun fact. Anyway, but here's the funny thing again, okay? My question is, like, Atwood, who are you, like, writing this for? I know who you're writing it for. You're writing it for, like, little feminists who are like, the patriarchy. Okay, but who are you writing it against? She claims it's not against, like, Christianity because Gilead people aren't genuinely Christian. Which, A, begs the question of, like, well, then why couch it all in Christian terms? And B, like, okay, for an example, Fahrenheit 451 is very clearly writing against mass media and people, like, not reading and not thinking and just checking out. He was like, I hate television, okay? Like, that's literally what it's about. 1984 is very much against, like, government control. Fascism type, like, the government getting into all aspects of your lives and controlling media and speech. Okay? Okay, fair. Brave New World is very much a, like, again, a reaction, like the feelies, like a reaction against, like, not thinking and just living hedonistic lives only for pleasure, okay? Okay. And Handmaid's Tale is a reaction against the patriarchy. And if you believe, like, Handmaid's Tale fans, that equals the Christian right. Because whenever anybody ever has any kind of slight restriction on abortion, they put on their Handmaid's Tale cosplay and, like, say, this is exactly like Gilead. But I'm like, what Christian sect has ever been in favor of euthanizing anybody? I mean, whatever age, but especially children. What about being anti-abortion to you looks like we should shred the unbabies? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And there's this whole thing in the beginning of The Handmaid's Tale where Gilead, like, they hang dissidents on the walls. Like, they hang a Catholic priest because Catholic priests are not in favor of what's going on in Gilead. They hang anybody, and they hang a bunch of abortionists, okay, on the wall because you can't have abortions, okay? And that's, I think, why everyone dons their cosplay every time that someone is like, maybe we shouldn't have, like, partial birth abortions for birth defects. And they're like, this is exactly like Gilead! And I'm like, is it? Because I'm pretty sure Gilead would just, like, shred those kids? Question mark? And I don't know if Atwood agrees or not. Like, I'm like, who did you think you were, like, reacting against? And I'm like, maybe it's just, like, general, like, patriarchal control of women's bodies. And I'm like, again, if that were true, then you wouldn't, like, give women the choice to, like, work in a brothel or be a handmaid or go to the colonies. You just have them be sex slaves. Like, it's so weird. It's so weird. I'm like, it's so poorly thought out. That's the thing. It's poorly thought out. It's like, if you're gonna write a dystopia and expect me to care, because the thing is, like, 1984, I actually don't care about the characters, but I dig the world building. Because I'm like, yeah, that's very fascinating and creepy and sadly prescient. Whereas this, it's like, okay, like, so you're saying that, like, people who are against abortion are dangerous, but also, like, the people who are against abortion are totally into, like, shredding the unfit babies. Maybe Atwood is one of those people who thinks that, like, oh, you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth. And it's like, okay, but that's not what, like, maybe, I don't know. I have no idea what she's trying to say. And that's the thing, is, like, if your theme is muddied, so muddied, that I'm like, what are you saying? What are you saying? What are you saying? I'm also, again, like, the whole, like, being fine with sterilizing people. Like, oh, Gilead just sterilizes, like, all the people in Jezebel's. And I'm like, A, what Christian sect is, like... And again, let's not say the Christian sect, because again, these aren't genuinely Christian. Okay, what right-wing conservative is fine with sterilizing people? Okay, there's a few that are into sterilizing pedophiles, but what right-wing conservative is in favor of having brothels, even if they're, like, a scumbag hypocrite who, like, has a mistress? Like, what right-wing conservative is in favor of, like, shredding and euthanizing the unfit? Like, I'm just like, what? Who are you writing about, Margaret Atwood? What are you talking about? It doesn't make sense. And that's my thing, is I'm like, if she was just like, man, those pro-lifers are scumbags. They kill abortionists, and they force you to have kids, and, like... And again, we put you in camps, and even if you, like... Again, like, that would be insulting. Incredibly insulting. But it would be less, like... stupid, I guess, if you're like, you will have this, like, deformed baby and take care of it. Like, maybe, like, you know how, like, I think it's in, is it in Brave New World, where there's, like, the G people who are, like, not, they're, like, mentally, like, challenged, and they are basically, like, slaves. Like, you could do something like that. Again, it would be horrible and, like, totally strawmanning your enemy and, like, awful and inaccurate, but much less dumb. I don't like how dumb this book is. And I don't like how smart people think it is. People are like, this is a masterpiece. And I'm like, is it though? Is it a masterpiece? Of what? Of what? Of what? What is it saying? Like, yeah, if you, like, did this in society, it would be really bad. But who in society is saying we should? That's my thing. Is dystopias work because they're not about a, like, much like prophecy. Okay, prophecy in, like, biblical terms, since we're talking about the Bible, it's not necessarily about what's going to happen. It's about what is happening. Similar to, like, the book of Revelation, and everyone's like, what's it saying? What's the prophecy? I'm like, it wasn't really a prophecy. It was like, here's, like, coded language for what's going down now. For example, 666 is basically code for the Emperor Nero. Like, that's what that is, okay? It's happening now. Dystopias work when they're about what's happening now. Okay? So, yeah, I just don't know. In The Handmaid's Tale, like, yes, it would be really scary if you were, you know, had to be a handmaid, or you had to be a wife, and it'd actually be kind of okay if you were a Martha, because, yeah. But, like, we're an Econo wife, or you're just, like, a normal person. You're like, I mean, I can't work, but, like, at least I'm not a sex slave, so, got off easy. But no, I'm like, who, like, and here's why it bothers me. I don't know what she's trying to say, but so many people who read this think she's trying to say, this is exactly what's happening when, like, literally anything ever, like, is passed that's, like, slightly conservative. And I'm like, no, though. Like, none of it, like, this isn't the same thing. This isn't the same thing. If you happen to be, I don't know, against abortion, that doesn't mean you're against women working. If you happen to be, I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of anything else in Gilead that makes any sense. Like, nothing. Because nothing makes sense. I'm like, nobody wants to, like, separate women into their weird, like, different roles, Marthas. And again, what is the point of, like, separating people into Marthas and whatever? Because it's a YA dystopia and you have to separate things, like, into districts or colonies or whatever. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense to me. And whatever the heck they're called in Divergent houses, Hogwarts houses. I don't know. Anyway, like, it doesn't make sense. This is my rant. I'm just like, I just can't. My brain is just, yeah, it's gone. Because I try and think what Margaret Atwood could possibly be talking about. And this is the thing, too, is, like, so, like, again, that one person in my book group said it was a masterpiece, and this one person was like, oh, we read it in feminist literature class, despite the fact that it's really not feminist, which we'll talk about in one sec. Sorry. And then we had this person being like, oh, I read that in, like, college, and I was like, yeah, someone finally gets it. And I'm like, how much did your dads hate you? Like, how much of a bad childhood did you have that you honestly think anything in America is remotely similar to this? Are you kidding me? Maybe I just had, like, a good childhood and, like, my dad supported me and fun fact, little, like, history lesson. My grandma on my mom's side, her dad forced her to go to college. He was like, well, your brothers are going to college, so you're going to college too. Deal with it. And she was like, fine, I'm just going to take a bunch of, like, archaeology classes and botany classes because they're interesting, and then I'm going to flunk out. And she did. Like, she was like, whatever. And then for the rest of her life, she just kept reading, like, academic journals about archaeology because she thought it was interesting. She just didn't want to work in it because you're not defined by being a cog in the capitalist machine. But that's another rant for another day. But that's my, like, background. It's like, I've never had, and on my dad's side, it was basically a matriarchy as well. Like, I've never, ever understood the whole, like, yeah, we have to fight the patriarchy. And I'm like, really? Do you? Because, like, I don't know. Like, life is pretty darn sweet. And I'm saying this, it's really funny because I always talk about this and they're like, oh, well, like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm a single woman with a job. Like, pretty good job too, by myself. Like, I own my own house. But apparently I don't know what I'm talking about because, like, actually we're super oppressed and, like, it's just bizarre. It's just bizarre. I just don't get it at all. Like, what are you talking about? Okay. Well, that brings us to, is this a feminist book? Well, I would submit it's not. It's like all YA dystopias, it, like, pits women against each other. Where, like, the Marthas, like, and a bunch of Arcana wives, like, look down on the Handmaids. And I'm guessing it's because they're part of the cult and, like, Handmaids are, like, political, like, enemies. Except I'm guessing that, like, plenty of Arcana wives and Marthas are just hanging in there and don't agree with the cult and don't want to go to the colonies. So, like, they probably feel sorry for the Handmaids. And one of the Marthas is, like, she just wants a baby. Because, like, she's like, oh, like, really buddy-buddy with, like, Offred because, like, she just wants a baby. And I'm like, do you really think that women hate each other that much? Like, that we wouldn't have friends? Like, why isn't Offred friends with the Marthas? Why isn't... I get why the wife hates Offred because it's humiliating. But, like, I feel like the Marthas would be friendly with the Handmaids. Like, there's no and I feel like the Arcana wives would try to be as friendly as they could. Like, again, like, I feel like there's certain women who think that all women, like, just hate each other. And I'm like, how is that feminist? How? And no, I am not one of those people who thinks that all women have to be friends, which is another obnoxious thing in stories where, like, women barely know each other and they're like, oh, best friends. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. But it's weird to me when they're like, no, all women hate each other unless you like Offred, in which case you're a good guy, like Moira. And I'm like, okay, like, it's weird. But it's also another obnoxious thing is, like, oh, where was I going with this? Not a feminist book. Well, for example, later on, what happens is that the commander is, like, not getting anywhere with Offred in terms of having a baby, because he's probably sterile. And so the wife, probably knowing this, is like, hey, Offred, I'll like totally give you a favor if you sleep with Nick, our random, like, I don't know, guy who does stuff for us. Butler. Not a butler, but he might as well be. And Offred has the hots for Nick, even though she may or may not be still married to Luke. But who cares, right? Because, like, adultery. And she has no reason to believe... Like, she assumes that, like, the wife won't rat her out because the wife just really wants a baby because, you know, women. Am I right? Am I right? We just want babies. Unless we're cool like Offred, a working woman. Anyway, I'm just like, how is this a feminist book? How is this a feminist book? Like, anyway, there's even a okay, never mind. I'm just not going to go into it. Okay, so, Nick... Okay, so, like, Offred has no reason to think that Nick won't rat her out or that she won't get in trouble for this. But whatever. She's like, what are you going to give me? And the wife's like, I'll give you a picture of your daughter. And that's enough to do it for her because, like, Offred doesn't, like, bargain for anything. There's a part where she steals a match or, like, she is given a match and, like, doesn't use it and puts it in her, like, mattress. She never uses it because what is agency? Why would you... Agency from a woman in a feminist novel? Nah. And so she just, there's a picture of her daughter. Not like a chance to see her daughter, not a chance to know where her daughter is, just a picture of her daughter. And she's like, oh, okay, I'll do it. And I'm like, really? That's all it takes? Okay. I mean, yes. Like, there is a strong bond between mother and child. But, like, just a picture, and that's all it takes to do something, A, like, gross and adulterous against her husband, and B, which she's already did with the commander, but that's kind of different because it's kind of forced. It is forced, actually. There's a part... okay, hold on. Also, dangerous because she could get in trouble. But anyway, there's a part where she's, like, talking about the ceremony, aka having sex with the commander, and she's like, it wasn't really rape. And I'm like, how is this a feminist book? It is... Like, if you're coerced into having sex, which, if someone's saying... you have to have sex with this guy or go to the colonies. Like, that is rape, actually. You're being coerced. How is this a feminist book? I don't understand it. But anyway, whatever. She wants to sleep with Nick anyway because she's got goo goo gaga eyes for him and they have sex the one time. And then she, like, keeps sneaking out to see him. And he is a total sleazewad who's like, oh, this is fine. Like, he's a sleazewad. Oh, but don't worry, he eventually, like, helps her escape with, like, the help of the, like, Mayday, whatever, resistance. And I'm like, I mean, A, that doesn't make him a good person. Like, he's just kind of nice that he, and I'm glad he, like, helped her escape and all after, like, using her like a piece of tissue, but whatever, you know. But it's great, isn't it great in a feminist novel that the woman has to be saved by a man when she has zero agency and did nothing? She didn't even ask him to escape. She was actually ready to just stay with him because she, like, was in love with him, goo goo gaga eyes. Yeah, he, like, had her escape. Like, yep. Isn't that great? Isn't that super feminist? In conclusion, this is not a feminist novel because it's not saying anything like, to me, feminism, again, the dictionary definition of feminism is women's equality with men. Okay? Striving for women's equality with men. This makes... The characters of women in this look like idiots compared to the men. First of all, not very feminist of you. 2, it is so poorly written. And its target audience is women. And we're just supposed to slap it up because we're women. And I'm like, how is that feminist? It's not feminist to put out a subpar product and say, well, you're just a woman. Like, it's for you. You'll accept it. And the sad thing is, most women do. That's the really sad thing, is that many, many, many women consider this a masterpiece. And I'm like, oh, we were talking to my book club, and I asked, is this a feminist novel? And 2 people correctly were like, well, what does that mean? And I was like, what do you think it means? And then one person said, of course, it's a masterpiece. And then one person said, like, well, I think so, because, like, it makes you as a woman feel like, yeah, like, no way would I let that happen to me. And I'm like, I didn't say this in the book club, but my thought is, like, you know what? That's probably why people consider it a feminist novel, which to me is like, Okay, so as long as like we can turn on your reptile brain, woman, and make you feel and emote, apparently that's enough to be a feminist novel. So insulting. So offensive. I cannot recommend Handmaid's Tale. It is long and slogging, but also the writing is fine, but the writing's kind of flowery, but the world building stinks. The world building is so bad, egregious, my friends, awful, awful, bad. So, in conclusion, that is my rant about Handmaid's Tale. Thank you for coming for my rant. Yeah, I'm sorry. It was really, really bad. And as a woman, I'm offended that I'm expected to like it. All right. See you next time. Bye.